Good evening, welcome, and thank you for attending our presentation on behavioral interventions. I'm Anthony Arcaro, the 6 to 12 Supervisor of Special Ed. We also have Randy Flaum, who's our Pre-K to 5 Supervisor of Special Education, and Marietta Ruella, who's our Director of Pupil Personnel Services, and we'd also like to welcome our SEPAG leadership. Tonight, we have our district BCBAs, Karitza Barry, Christy Brandt, Zachary Caruso, and Stacy Libros here to present on behavioral interventions. Some of the topics that will be covered tonight will include positive behavioral supports, reinforcement of behaviors, and understanding antecedent, replacement skills, and consequences-based strategies. So without further ado, I can turn over to our BCBAs.
Okay. Hi. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Christy Brandt. I am one of the district behavior specialists, and I've also taught here in Monroe for 7 years in our multiply disabled classrooms. So just to go over our agenda really quickly, first we're going to kind of talk about the role of a BCBA here in Monroe. Moving on, we will talk about the components of behavioral sports strategies, our home visits as components of our IEP programming, and our functional skills assessments that we use throughout the district. So just to get us all on the same page, what is a behavior analyst? For those of you who don't know, this is the definition that comes right from the BACB. We are graduate level certificated analysts. We are professionals that are certified as independent practitioners who use the science of behavior analysis to work on increasing, decreasing, and creating new types of behaviors. And we will kind of go into, as we continue the presentation, what types of things we actually do. We may also supervise board-certified assistant behavior analysts, RBTs or registered behavior technicians, and other professionals throughout the district who are implementing behavior analytic interventions. Okay, so our role here in Monroe. Within the Monroe Township School District, our analysts conduct observations. We train and provide supports to the teachers and staff in all of our special area programs. So this includes, we provide consultations as specified in students' IEPs, and this is for our non-self-contained students or students that are not in our specialized programs. We provide sports when applicable to our general education classrooms, and we provide trainings to support bus drivers and aides. A common misconception is that we only enter the classrooms to work on challenging behaviors. That's not the case. We are in the classrooms as a consultative model in order to support all types of behavior, whether that is skill acquisition, modifying behaviors, supporting changes to routines, lifestyle, things like that. So when we come into the classrooms on a frequent rotating basis, we are not just there to decrease maladaptive behaviors. We're not communicating only with the teachers when there is a problem. We are ongoingly supporting the classrooms to continue to create a learning environment for all of our students. Okay, so we have two separate kind of roles when we're talking about supporting the district. With our special program classrooms, our autism, multiply disabled, and LOD programs, annually we are assigned to the classrooms as behavior support specialists. Typically, there is 1 or 2 of us that are assigned to the classrooms based on the specific needs of those classrooms. When we are there, we are providing a consult model to the teachers. We meet with them frequently on an as-needed basis, but at least twice per month to communicate the needs of the classroom, changes, things that are going on that they might need extra support with. We are there to assist them in brainstorming. Maybe there's a layout of the classroom that isn't feeling quite right for them. We might assist with some environmental changes. Maybe they need some materials prepped for token economies or other things like that. Those are the things that we come in and help. They may see a new behavior arising. We may take some data collection on things like that. They may notice that the student is coming in and acting a different way. We may take data on something like that, and we would meet with the teacher or CST, anybody that's involved. It's not just the classroom teacher that we would meet with if needed. This would be our special area teachers, any people that are working with the students, speech, OT, their case managers and counselors, anybody like that. We also support the teachers, and we'll go on to this a little bit later on. Anything I'm kind of talking about right now, we will specify more better as we move on. We also work through behavior-based assessments to identify academic needs, functional needs, and adaptive needs. Sometimes it's been identified that children outside of our special programs of autism, MD, and LLD might require our support. So these are things that we are able to do. However, what is asked of the teachers in the general education resource and ICR setting is that they follow our district-wide special education behavior supports tiered system. I have that on the following slide. So what this is this is to make sure that the classroom teachers as well as the school staff within CST and other people within the classroom and the school are putting in observations and interventions prior to the BCBA team coming in. When we come in, there's a lot of work that's expected of the teachers and the people within the school building as far as collecting information and maybe making modifications that they're not as well equipped to do as our programs that have a higher teacher to student ratio. So we try to go through this tiered system to make sure that all of the best practices that should be happening as far as differentiation in these three types of settings are being taken care of prior to filling out a consultation form for the behavior support staff to come in. So you can see here, this is our tiered level of support. So what we do is we start at level 1. And level 1 is class-wide or individual behavior systems that the teacher would put in place to not change or disrupt what's going on in the classroom as a whole. The CST, your case managers, school psychologists, LDTCs would come in and assist with this type of modifications. If guidance is needed as well, they would do those things. If these things are put into place and we're still not seeing a change in the student behavior, they may move to a level 2. This is a team meeting that's led by a CST member to discuss the areas of concern that they're having. This will then have a formal PBS documentation filled out where that consult form will be sent up to Pupil Personnel Services, documenting the strategies that were used in as a whole class or individual, the outcome of those things, and the behaviors that we're still looking to rectify or see. When you move up to level 3, PPS will take a look at that and then disseminate, is this something that needs to be addressed through an IEP? Is this something that needs to be addressed through our behavioral support team? Or is this a school counselor, school psychologist type of situation that needs to be worked on? If it is in fact deemed that a behavior specialist would be a benefit to this classroom, we would then be assigned, and it's case by case and kind of based on our caseloads, one of us would be assigned to that classroom. We would go in and we would treat that classroom exactly the same as we would create one of the strategies and observations that we do for our special programs. For this identification of further supports, we know that, and it's our hope that through our best practice strategies and some of the modifications that we're doing on our daily consults with our teachers and the staff members within the schools, that we can see an increase in skill acquisition as well as a decrease in any maladaptive behaviors. However, we know sometimes that's not the case. Further supports may be needed, and we are able to support that as well. The way we identify if further supports are needed, and these supports we will be discussing as the presentation continues, we will identify that if the data expresses that there is a significant increase in unsafe behaviors, our data expresses a plateau in skills that are necessary to continue learning. So again, we are not just here to work on maladaptive behaviors. If we notice that a student is not acquiring the skills that they once were to continue their academic progress, we're going to come in too and we're going to assist with that. emergence of any new behaviors, and of course, regression of acquired skills. We're here for the whole child, and that is our goal. So when the teachers have us in the classrooms, I just want you guys to all keep in mind, we're there for the whole child. We're there for academic success, behavioral success, and life success. In that, Zach will continue with some of the behavioral supports that we have within our district.
Hi everyone, for those who don't know me, my name's Zach. I'm also one of the district BCBAs, and I'm brand new to Monroe this year, so I want to thank everyone for being so welcoming of me. I've been, feeling the love and, the support from my fellow BCBAs has been great. So I want to thank everyone for that. Right now I'm going to talk a little bit more about behavior supports. So this is going to be going a little bit more in detail about different ways that we as behavior analysts support our classrooms, and a bit about what the process looks like for determining to what level of support a specific classroom or an individual student needs. Oops. Okay, so in applied behavior analysis, we look at behavior within the context of the environment that the behavior takes place in. It's called applied behavior analysis because it transcends all theoretical knowledge and is very much applied to a real world environmental type of setting. And so when we're assessing, evaluating behavior, we want to specifically break it down within the context of the environment that it's taking place in. And we have a very systematic way of doing that. We use a model that we call a three-term contingency. And this is a stepwise sequence that we use, a three-step sequence that we use to look at behavior as it occurs naturally in the environment. Okay, so it allows a behavior analyst to observe the behavior as it naturally occurs. The three steps of the contingency are the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, which we'll go into a little bit more with each of those steps right now. The first step of the contingency is the antecedent, and this is going to refer to anything that takes place in the environment prior to a behavior that might set the occasion for that behavior. Again, we're looking for things that are observable. We want to see what's going on in the environment. Some common antecedents that we see in a school setting specifically are going to include work demands being presented, denied access to or removal of preferred items or activities, attention being removed or diverted elsewhere, and transitions between different activities. And the list doesn't stop there. Those are just some common ones that we see specifically in a school setting. Okay, but really with the antecedent, we want to see what's going on in the environment prior to a behavior that might be eliciting a specific behavioral response. Second step of the contingency is the behavior itself. Now when we're analyzing behavior, again, we want to talk about what is observably taking place. We record a lot of data, and when we're recording antecedent behavior consequence data, when we're talking about the specific behavior itself, we want to make sure that we're being as objective as possible, because most of the time we have multiple people who are involved in the process of tracking behavior, recording the data for it. So we want to make sure that we're being consistent all the way through. That way there isn't room for any type of confusion. So for example, instead of recording data as Johnny became upset, we might say a more observable data might be reported as Johnny engaged in crying behavior. Crying is more specific. We know what crying looks like. Became upset could be perceived differently among different people. Okay, so we just want to make sure that we're using language that is as objective as possible, so that way everyone who's involved in the process knows exactly what they're looking for, and we're all reporting the same types of behaviors. Okay, the final step, the third step of the contingency is the consequence. There's sometimes a major misconception out there that a consequence has to be something that's negative. That's not always the case. And in fact, when we look at the consequence, oftentimes we're looking at specifically what is reinforcing that behavior. Because what's reinforcing a behavior is going to be what's maintaining it and going to make it more likely to occur again in the future under similar circumstances. Okay, so some of the common reinforcing consequences that we might see in a school setting include delaying work, gaining access to preferred items or activities, gaining access to attention. Okay, so we're looking for specific things that are taking place, again, observable things that are taking place following a behavior that might be maintaining it and reinforcing that behavior. I usually, when I talk about this type of stuff, I usually like to give a real world type of example because this is an applied science, and this type of contingency is all around us. Everything we do, this happens every day. And so one example I like is I'll talk about, say you're in the car, you're stopped at a red light. Okay, the light changes to green, so you engage in the behavior of taking your foot off the brake and onto your accelerator, and then you continue on driving. Okay, we can break that down. Antecedent here, the light turns green. Okay, so that's the environmental stimulus that is going to signal to us that we can now engage in the behavior of taking our foot off the brake and onto the gas, which will result in the consequence of us gaining access to reinforcement in the form of reaching our destination. Okay, so it's always interesting when you think about it because it's such you don't, when you're going about your daily lives, you don't necessarily think about behavior to that extreme of an extent, but it's happening all around us. And so when we're looking at behavior in a school setting, we're just kind of applying that information to the classroom and looking at behaviors that are going on, and we're trying to look for patterns in behavior that can give us some information as to why behavior is occurring, which can help us figure out how we're going to intervene. What are some effective strategies that we might be able to implement? Keep skipping ahead. Okay. All right, so how do we use this information within the Monroe Township School District? So ABC data, antecedent behavior consequence, ABC, it reveals, like I said, it's going to reveal a pattern that informs us of the behavioral function. Now, when I say behavioral function, what I'm talking about is that why piece. Why is the behavior occurring? Once we know why a behavior is occurring, then that gives us valuable information as to what sort of supports are going to be most effective for that individual student. So understanding the function is going to allow us to identify replacement skills to be taught. One thing that we know about behavior is that it happens for a reason, okay? If a student's engaging in a behavior, they're trying to communicate something to us, whether it be they're trying to gain access to something, they're trying to avoid something, and we don't want to just tell that student, no, you can't do that, because they're trying to express themselves. So we need to teach a functional replacement skill that they can engage in that will be a more functional life skill for them that will help them to gain access to and communicate the things that they need to communicate. We'll be able to create specific visuals, visual reminders, schedules, so a student knows, the expected routine. Any environmental modifications we can make. We will provide training to classroom staff outside of classroom hours, talk about specific strategies, give advice, ask what some concerns are, and we can talk about possible ways that we can offer support. And we'll also provide in vivo modeling and coaching of strategies. So we'll come into a classroom while school is in session as well, and we'll work directly with the student and model for classroom staff how to implement certain procedures. We'll do just in-situation type of skills training to teach, to help assist and teach staff in implementing strategies. All right, so we use a tiered level system of support. The BCBA team comes automatically attached to the autism MD and LLD classrooms in the Monroe School District. There's always at least one or two of us attached to one of those classrooms, And the way that we're going to offer support to those classrooms, we use kind of a tiered system of support. We're going to start at, least intensive, and we'll go, develop further if a particular student needs more individualized support. So the way we usually start is we just have an ongoing consultation. There's just an open communication between us and the teacher throughout the school year. That can be something as simple as frequently checking in. Hey, how are things going? Is there anything you need? Do you need any assistance developing any materials? Do you need any suggestions on strategies? Just having an open line of communication is that first line of support that we're going to offer. Now, if a teacher does identify specific concerns, we might then conduct observations and informal data collection. And so informal data collection basically just means it's not part of a formalized assessment. We're just going to schedule observations. We'll come in, observe the student in class, take some data and try to get some information as to what might be going on. And then following that, we can collaborate with the teacher and any other team members involved to help develop and modify best practice strategies within the classroom that might be supportive for any particular students that teacher may need some additional assistance with. Following that, we're always going to monitor our progress that we're making with the student. Follow-up data collection is important. Once we've implemented strategies, we always want to keep taking data so we can see if the strategies that we've implemented is having a significant impact on the behaviors. Okay, so we want to make sure we're monitoring and we can make modifications to these strategies on an as-needed basis. Over time, we want to determine the success of these strategies and identify if any additional supports are needed. So all this listed here, these would all be considered positive behavior supports. Okay, so positive behavior supports are these best practice antecedent strategies that we implement, environmental manipulations that are really designed to support our students, to support their behavior, and we're just trying to make those any modifications that we can make to better assist and support those students. Now, if sometimes those antecedent strategies alone might not be enough support for a particular student, at which case they might need something more individualized, which is when we would talk about implementing a behavior intervention plan. Okay, so behavior intervention plans, or BIPs, are a more intensive and individualized treatment plan that are based on behavioral function. So again, why the behavior is occurring. They are usually created based on the results of a functional behavior assessment, which is a formalized assessment that we use to determine behavioral function. And then based on understanding what the function of the behavior is, we can then develop a data-informed and function-based behavior intervention plan. BIPs include specific antecedent strategies, replacement skills, and consequence protocols. Okay. And here are just some examples of possible strategies that we might implement in a PBS plan or in a behavior intervention plan. These are just some common strategies that we might be providing. Those are offering controlled choices, okay, use of visual schedules or reminders, functional communication training. Again, teaching those functional replacement skills is going to be key to behavior modification. Pairing, which is when we talk about staff pairing themselves with reinforcement, so that way you're developing on that therapeutic rapport with the student, that therapeutic relationship. The student sees you and they're excited to see you. They've paired you with all these great things, okay? Use of timers and transition warnings, first-then statements, plan breaks throughout the day, non-contingent attention, so providing attention just non-contingently throughout the day. Again, that's going to help us to pair with the students. Non-contingent attention, differential reinforcement procedures, token reward systems, behavior-specific praise, and planned ignoring of maladaptive behavior. So these are just a bunch of different strategies that you might see in a PBS plan or in a behavior intervention plan. All right, so now we're going to start going into home supports, and Stacy is going to take over.
That's a hard act to follow. Thanks a lot, Zach. Hi, my name is Stacy Libros. I've been in the district for 9 years. 7 of those years, I was a district speech therapist, and 2 years ago, I became one of the district BCBAs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about home supports. Okay. Home supports. They provide families and school team members a better opportunity to connect, communicate, and to collaborate. I got to get my, and no good BCBA would, a good BCBA always comes up with a little bit of research. So there's research to support home visits. The outcomes for home visits will increase student performance, reduce discipline problems. Students will have better attendance, and students will have an overall positive attitude towards school. This may be the result of benefits of home visits. Oh, that's nice and tiny. Okay, ready? Overall benefits for home visits are that they establish communication between families and the school team members, and they help to establish rapport and trust. I'll go through that. Ready? The benefits of home visits for families is it allows families to be more likely to voice their concerns, speak candidly, and allow team members into their lives. Sometimes when you're in a big, large homeschool, a team meeting in the schools, it can seem a little bit overwhelming. So being in the home is a little bit more intimate and allows the families to feel more at ease. It allows families to be more likely to become involved in the family's learning, and it allows families to be more involved in school activities and volunteering. The benefits for home visits for school team members include providing an opportunity to interact with students and their families in their home setting in order to better understand the students' strengths and areas of need. Another benefit would be it provides insight into the student's culture. And a third benefit would be it provides the opportunity to gain information and help with motivation, behavior, and academic achievements of the student. So we believe in this district that parents are the best expert in their children. So overall, one of the things that home visits allow is that it allows the team members to learn from the families, and it allows the families to learn from the team members. Okay. So home supports within Monroe Township School District. Self-contained students with an IEP typically have 6 home visits put into their IEP. Typically those home visits last about an hour, but that can vary. One of the home visits can be initiated by either the team member or a family member. The team member who goes into the home will be dependent on the areas of needs and the areas of concern. Okay, so for example, the speech therapist can go into the home. As a speech therapist, I had gone into the home, and some of the things that I had worked on while I was in the home was training on augmentative communication devices so that the parents were able to understand the augmentative communication device that the student was using, how to evoke language within the home, and scenarios and ways in which you can set up more language and increase language development. The team members can go into the home and they can generalize the skills that are from school into the home. Additionally, teachers can also help to coordinate between home teams that the students have, and make sure that both the home team and the school team are focusing on the same goals, and they're pretty much doing things equally so that the student is getting some consistency in their learning. And then the BCBAs complement the team members with a focus on strategies that focus on behavior reduction and skill acquisition. Thanks. If scheduling a home visit, or if you don't want us to come into the home, we can always schedule a home visit somewhere else. That's up to what the parents or the families would like. So during a home visit. So during a home visit, the team member will come to the home and we'll have a flexible agenda based on your concerns. And then at the home visit, we will start to have an engagement or a communication with the parents. And we'll ask questions like, what are your students' strengths? What are your students' weaknesses? What are the areas of concern? What are your goals and objectives for this student? Okay? And what we do is we take those areas, of concern and the areas of strength, and we determine what programs or what strategies we want to put into the home. Okay? Let me spell this. Whoop! Sorry. Hold on. Told you. Hold on. Okay. Got it. Nope, that next one. Okay. So, for example, some of the things that we can, some examples of home supports and strategies to increase success in the home include teaching families like best practice procedures. So we've talked of things like establish clear expectations, create routines for your family and your student, anticipate changes accordingly, right? These are all the things that we had talked about, which will help the student to stay happy, relaxed, and engaged is the terminology that we like to use, right? And to decrease the chances of having any interfering behaviors. We talk about modeling the behaviors that you want, using can-do language, right? So talk about the things that you want the student to do, right? As opposed to saying the things like no and don't and things like that. We want to talk about providing words and emotions and feelings, right? So we do want to talk about those internal events, especially when they're happening together and in the moment, right? So we want to talk about things like feeling hurt and upset and whatnot. We want to look behind the behavior of what your student is telling you. So interfering behaviors are their behaviors. They are telling us what the student wants. So when you look at those interfering behaviors, you can say, you're telling me that you want this particular thing with your body, right? So what we want to do is we want to replace those behaviors by giving the student the words in which they need to get those needs met in an alternative and more appropriate way. And then reinforce steps in the right direction, right? So you want to be able to give the student some positive feedback about, yep, you got it, you're going, you're doing it, you're awesome, okay? So that's, some more, like these are like these best practice procedures, but when we go into the home, we could also do more skill acquisition for students. There is no, well, I could do this slide, hold on. Okay, so for skill acquisition, okay. So we also work on skill acquisition. So an example of working on some skill acquisitions would be teaching functional life skills, okay? So we would work on things like following a schedule, right? So this is an example of following a morning schedule. I had a particular student who needed a little bit of, he needed a little direction and he needed support in getting him out of the house before school started, right? So we established a visual schedule for his morning routine, and this will be taught to him if he has the availability to follow a task analysis like this, we'll automatically implement it in the home. But if he has difficulty in learning and understanding on how to do a task analysis, we'll teach it in the school first, and then we'll generalize it in the home, okay? So that's an example of following a schedule. We can work on hygiene skills, right? Brushing teeth, washing body, brushing hair, okay? These are life skills. If we don't teach the student how to do it independently, somebody is going to have to do it for them, and that's one thing that we want to work on. We could talk about household chores. For this particular student, we wanted to have a work schedule for him when he came home, right? So that he can be engaging in very productive behaviors. So this is one part of an afternoon schedule, right? But the student didn't know how to wash laundry, so we established a task analysis for him. And again, if he understands how to use this task analysis, we'll put it right into the home. But if he doesn't, we'll start working on these skills in the school. The other things that we can work on, again, like setting the table, washing the dishes, loading the dishwasher, and things like that. And then the other things that we could work on is community skills, such as ordering food, purchasing items with cash, and purchasing items with credit cards, right? So these are some of the supports that we would be working on with you and your students, the families and the students in the home. Okay? Oh, sorry. Functional adaptive assessments.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Caritza Fernandez-Barry. I am the BCBA that's been here the longest, and I'm not going to say how many years, but I'm happy to be back at the CPAC meetings, and hopefully the information that we've shared so far and what we have left you'll find really helpful. So I'm going to discuss academic, functional, and adaptive assessments. The ones that we'll cover all fall under the ABA umbrella, which is why we're going to be introducing it. These are not the only tools that we have in the district, but are the ones that we as BCBAs use to support the teachers and other staff members working with our learners. We use these tools specifically in collaboration with those teachers. Oh, this is tricky. I thought it was just you, Stace. So we use these tools in conjunction with other assessments and curriculums that are present in the district. So these are not standalones, but in conjunction with, let's say, things like reading milestones and EdMark and Touch Math and the Envision Math curriculum. So it's a whole package. I know there's a lot of acronyms up here, and we've probably heard a lot of other acronyms already today. I will explain what each of these assessment tools bring to the table. They all have a strength, and so it's not to say that you can only use one with a particular learner. We use sometimes a combination of them depending on those individual needs. What we do really want to focus on is that these assessments are really helping us to focus on that skill acquisition. So as my colleagues have been sharing through our discussion, BCBAs aren't just working on the reduction of maladaptive behavior. So while we're using these assessments, we're really looking to see what abilities our students already have, what are the skills we really want to focus on to really teach more of those replacement skills. The more skills that a student has, the less likely we are to see some of those maladaptive behaviors, because we're really looking at teaching things such as functional communication training through some of the communication skills. We're teaching emotion and perspective taking. There's more advanced skills talking about like vocational skills, so teaching independence and autonomy. So those are all really important things that we want to be focusing on in the classroom, and then generalizing them outside of the classroom as well. Okay. The beauty of the assessment tools that I'm going to go through is that they are not standardized in the way that we utilize them. And so it really allows us to take that moment when we're working with that student to really make changes to really gather the most important and relevant information. So that allows us to, for instance, change the wording for the directions. We can use different materials, not just the materials that come with the assessment, but things maybe that we can find in the classroom. It allows us to use some of those best practice strategies that were discussed earlier, such as providing reinforcement just for staying on task and working. Using different token boards or things that are already successful with the student in the classroom while we're doing these assessments specifically. All of the assessments are structured in beginning with easier skills and then becoming much more complex and more difficult. So when we are doing those assessments, we do try to see what areas might have splintered skills, what areas we know are strengths, and then really identifying those areas of need so that that teacher and the team members can really hone in on those things in the classroom. So the first assessment that I'm going to just briefly go into, there's obviously a lot more information than what we can cover in one night, is called the VB MAP. It stands for the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment and Program Placement. This particular assessment tool really focuses a lot on communication and language skills. So really starting with vocal imitation, progressing to requesting, and then what we call interverbal. So that's the back and forth exchange, such as engaging in a conversation with somebody. But it does expand to other areas. What this tool brings is really looking at foundational learning skills as we're looking at the development from 0 to 18 months through about 48 months. Because it caps at 48 months, the academic piece is really just introduction of reading and basic math skills. So we're really looking at some of those other foundational skills with this tool in particular to see where that student's skills are. So you can see that there's things such as imitation, play and leisure, and group skills as well that we might be targeting here. This tool was actually developed with input from a variety of disciplines, which is really nice because when we're looking at our learners in the district, we do have the full spectrum of disciplinary team members who are working with our learners. So you're looking at OTs, speech therapists, special education teachers, and BCBAs who develop this particular tool. The second assessment that sometimes we utilize as we're trying to gather those, the information for those goals and objectives is the ABLES-R, and that stands for the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills, revised, so this is the second edition. This tool is very similar to the first one that I just discussed, which is that VB map. It does have a greater range of skills, whereas the VB map covers 16 areas, the ABLES covers 26 areas. So it goes a little bit further into other skills such as self-help skills. So we have areas to assess such as eating and dressing, toileting, while also still overlapping a lot with that VB map, including those communication skills, those group skills, some motor imitation, fine and gross motor as well. For this particular assessment, it does cap at about 60 months of age. So the academic skills that we're introducing at this area are also at the early foundational level for reading, writing, math, and spelling. So like to give you an example, for spelling, you might start with teaching the student just to identify letter matching, letter-to-letter identification, and then eventually moving to having them be able to spell their name. And again, these are the types of tools that we'd want to use in conjunction with other things that are relevant to that classroom setting. You'll see that there's things in this particular tool such as linguistics and syntax and grammar. So that does tie right into nicely with what some of the speech therapists are working on. So that's a way for us to work collaboratively with them as well. Okay.
I didn't get that. Could you try?
Our third assessment tool that we utilize in the district is called PEAK. It stands for Promoting the Emergence of Advanced Knowledge. This tool is taking information from that VB map and the ABLES, but taking those skills and taking them beyond into older ages and much more complex skills. It's one of the newer tools that we have at our disposal, and we do use it in conjunction with some other tools as well. This particular assessment really does a nice job of supporting teachers in teaching more generalized skills and more finer discrimination. So we're looking at not just teaching in isolation, but teaching kind of that concept formation and then being able to apply that to different situations. So for example, if we're trying to teach our learner different articles of clothing, instead of it just being just all shirts, there could be a variation of shirts. It could be button downs and sweaters and tank tops and jackets that all kind of fall under that umbrella, and being able to kind of discriminate all of those components. With this particular assessment tool, the programming that aligns with it is really helping us to teach the learners what we call derived responding. So what that basically just means is that rather than trying to teach skills in isolation, we're teaching more an understanding of relationships. So if we're trying to teach all of the facets of what a dog is, it's not just the picture of the dog, but also the habitats of the dog, the written word dog, the vocal word dog, and other features and functions to it. And the idea is that rather than teaching each of those skills in isolation, we're going to teach a few of those relationships, and then through the way that we're teaching, the student learns those other skills without that direct instruction. So we're really getting more bang for our buck when we're using these derived relational responses. You can see that with this particular assessment, there's 4 different areas or categories, and it does get into some other complex concepts, such as differentiating between the things that are the same, things that are different, things that are opposites and hierarchies, and perspective taking. So for example, we might say, like, how is a plane and a bird the same? How are they different? So we're looking at function, but then we're also looking at they're different because they're different categories. When we're looking at like hierarchies, things that are contained within things. So what can you find in a kitchen? So kind of generating different ideas that there's not just one single response for. Okay, the next assessment tool is called the AFLS, the Assessment of Functional Living Skills. This tool actually was developed to follow the ABLS. It does start as early as age 5, but the beauty of it is that it can go through adolescence and adulthood. With this particular tool, we're really looking at skills beyond academics and communication and looking at more adaptive skills. When we're thinking about adaptive skills, we're thinking about any skill that we want our learner to be able to do independently. And those are the skills that if they didn't know how to do themselves, someone else would have to do for them. And so they're really those crucial life skills that we want them to be able to do on their own. And considering where their needs are and the settings is how we then identify what skills to pick from this tool to work on in the school setting. It is aligned nicely across different settings, so you can see that the different domains include community and home. It does include academic skills based on core academics and also applied academics. So how are we taking those math concepts and then utilizing them into that community setting? So as our learners are learning to, shop, as Stacy said, it's a skill that we might work on in a home visit, but also during like community-based instruction as well. So we're looking at the concept and translating it into practical and usefulness. So our younger students might be working, let's say, on the concept of sorting. So we're sorting by categories, we're sorting by different features. As we're teaching that concept of sorting into more practical usefulness, our learners should be able to start to learn, all right, we're gonna sort different food items within the kitchen. Some go in the refrigerator, some go in the freezer, some go in the pantry. We're sorting laundry, we're sorting silverware and dishware, so all of those skills that you might need to be independent as you're getting older. And then the last assessment that is very similar to the AFLS is the EFLS. So lots of mouthfuls of acronyms. So this one is the Essentials for Living Skills. This tool is similar in the AFLS in that it also starts as very early learners, as early as age 2, but goes into that adolescence and adulthood. This particular tool is actually similar to the AFLS in that it really focuses on those functional and adaptive skills, but it also really has a strong focus on those communication skills as well. And what I really like about this tool is that they identify what they call the essential 8. So we're looking at 8 essential skills that are really needed for students to be independent and autonomous, but also making sure that we're not seeing those interfering and maladaptive behaviors, right? The other thing that this tool does is it really does a nice job of categorizing their skills. So they talk about must-have skills, good to have, and then nice to have. And so it really kind of aligns it in a way that you can prioritize where is this learner right now, where should I be focusing on so that they're meeting with the greatest success, and then have kind of a plan of where you want to go to. So for example, an essential 8 would be accepting being told no. That's really hard for a lot of kids. Sometimes adults have a hard time accepting no as well, right? And so that's an essential 8 that we'd want to teach all of our students, because we can't just all kind of cross our arms and pout when we don't get our way. That would be a must-have, right? A good to have in that same category of communication would be being able to engage in a conversation to ask for information using where questions. So that's a nice to have, but if my student doesn't know how to accept no without throwing a tantrum, that's where we need to focus on. So it really is just a really nice structure to help us to be able to prioritize the things that are most important at that time. So those are the kind of the general summary of our assessment tools. Obviously, like I said, there's much more information that we'd be able to share if anybody has any questions. At this time, we open it to our audience. If there's any questions or comments or anything that you'd like to, get more information on that we discussed. Yes, Mrs. Sabarito?
I'll start with a comment. I have not worked with Mr. Zach, and I apologize, I don't know your last name, but I will say that we have had the privilege of working with the three of you, Ms. Barry, Ms. Libros, and Ms. Brand. And I say privilege because you guys are powerhouses, and what you're doing is not easy. We are very lucky to have you in this district. Ms. Barry, I've told you this often, I speak with a lot of people throughout the state who consider one of the best behaviors in the state. And you met my son when he was 3, he's now 12, and everything you've done has been outstanding. Ms. Brandt, we've worked with you a few times, you've also done an incredible job, and Ms. Libros, I don't even know what to say to you because you were Lucas's speech person for 6 years, and it is because of you that he's speaking and communicating. I won't get emotional, so I'll say thank you. That being said, I have a lot of questions about just BCBAs and behaviors in general. So I think too often, and I made the mistake early on, when you think about behavior, it's always that negative, super negative. And I hate that in this district, that student is so behavioral. Like I wish we could just change that way we describe the student. The student is having some challenges behavior, right? And again, I also made the mistake of thinking that behavior was aggressions, elopement, like all those negative things, as opposed to my son self-talks. That's a behavior, right? But when you say behavioral, it's so negative. So if we could somehow start with getting everybody on board, and I'll leave this also to you guys, with that description of students that are human beings, that would probably be great, and maybe give them a little more exposure as to what a behavior is. And we spoke a lot about maladaptive, but it's also skill acquisition. So you guys all know that in the special needs world, people either love ABA or do not. I happen to be somebody who loves it because of the way it's implemented by you guys as professionals, by the teachers that we've been privileged to have. So I think that that's important to get that message out there about it's not what your name here is a cookie, what your name here is a cookie, because that too often, I think if we could start spreading that to the schools, that would be great. One of the questions I have is, so can you describe how addressing a behavior is different if you're addressing maladaptive behavior versus skill acquisition versus desensitization? Because those are 3 things that I struggle with at home. And then, well, if you answer that, then
Sure.
I'll answer my other.
Well, that's a good question, and to backtrack, I appreciate you recognizing that we don't just do the reduction of those interfering behaviors, because that is a big misconception that we're only here to kind of just put out those fires, and really, if we really work on those skill acquisition and those replacement skills, half of the battle of decreasing those maladaptive behaviors is solved right there. So with regards to your specific question, like how do we differentiate? So desensitization is a way that we look to actually as a strategy, right? So we are going to use different strategies to desensitize a particular student to something that we may not think is aversive, but that they think is aversive, right? So I had a student who found the song Happy Birthday really aversive. And so it was a socially significant behavior for that family because they're not able to take their child to family birthday parties because it would trigger significant tantrum behaviors. And so it really does isolate the family from being able to just partake in what things that we take for granted. And so we would use a desensitization strategy for like that type of a behavior, right? So it's more of a strategy that can be applied. And usually we use like tolerance and shaping, right? So maybe you, as this example, like what we did is we had like a pre-recorded portion of the Happy Birthday song played at a very soft volume while the student engaged in a preferred activity. And so then we systematically increased the volume, the length of the song, and also to a point where not only were you not engaged, you kind of were just sitting waiting, because if you think about the natural setting, right, and Zach talked a lot about that, like the applied science is looking at it in your everyday life. So in a birthday party, everybody's quiet and like, meaning you're not doing anything other than singing. So you have to be able to tolerate listening to that song with nothing else happening at that time. And so that's kind of our ultimate goal when we're desensitizing a student with such a behavior.
So would you consider sensitivity a behavior?
No. Sensitivity is something that we all have, right? So like, I bet if I asked how many of you here are sensitive to different like textures of clothing, we'd all have probably raised our hand for something, like I cannot stand wool, I can't, right? And so I think there are certain things that we also have to recognize that we wouldn't want to desensitize a student to, because I wouldn't make you wear something that made you feel that uncomfortable. If I can have you, as long as you're wearing something that is appropriate for the weather, that would be fine, right? And so you're really looking to only work on desensitizing a behavior when it is impeding with like the quality of life for that student and that family. Right? And so it's not for me to determine that, it's for you as the caregiver to say, I can't take my child to such and such place because this is happening. Does that make sense, right? And then I think your other kind of part of that same question is the differentiation between like how do we differentiate behaviors? Was that it? Right. Maladaptive behaviors versus skill acquisition. And so when we're looking at maladaptive behaviors, it's really looking at kind of like what the name is, right? So any behavior that's kind of interfering with the ability to learn. And I'm going to use a behavior that you shared as an example, which was self-talk, right? And so it might be less significant than a student who's engaging in, let's say, aggressive behaviors, but we're looking at how is that particular behavior impacting the learner, and then determining when do we want to address it. So self-talk in particular, there's a lot of research that says like, it's very difficult to drop down to 0 levels, and B, it's really not in the best interest of the child because it's something that typically is internally reinforcing for them, right? And so who am I to say that that behavior should be non-existent, right? Again, if you see me, I'm shaking my leg, I flip my pens. Those are all like stereo kind of typic behaviors. I like how they feel. They make me like, I brought up a pen here because I like to hold things and do those kinds of things, right? And so you'd think the same for self-talk, but we're looking at, while let's say the student is in the classroom and the teacher is in front instructing, that would be an instance where we want to decrease it. And so we use our strategies to help the student learn kind of to turn it on and turn it off. And then we use our principles of reinforcement to make sure that that lesson of like, this is when it's okay to do it without like you telling me, hey, it's not time for that, versus when it's not okay to do it. And so it's not an all or nothing. It's teaching that student to discriminate based off of the context in that environment.
And I learned as a parent, but I think we have to express that to parents, that you're never going to eliminate a behavior, because then that child is always, or that student or that person is always going to be frustrated. It's kind of teaching them when you can and when you can't.
Exactly.
And I have this little question, sorry.
It's okay. We left time for questions, so.
So when do you decide that you need to do an FBA? Who does that FBA? Because I've been doing a lot of reading on the fact that in a lot of school districts, it is not a behaviorist that's doing it, and that really affects the data that you're collecting. And at what point do we say, okay, this maladaptive behavior, or I'm assuming an FBA is only for maladaptive behavior?
Yeah, so usually, as like Zach had covered, like we're looking at determining like the function, the why that behavior is happening, and looking to reduce the occurrence of that behavior through the strategies that we're going to be recommending. So yes.
So is there a timeline? Let's say I'm a student that has some very aggressive behaviors, right? And we implement a behavioral plan, not formally, but kind of do the ABCs. Mm-hmm. At what point do we say, this is not working? And the reason I ask that is because I think also how that's being implemented plays a big role.
Yes.
So if you're implementing it and you've come up with a behavioral plan, I'm certain it is flawless. But if I'm implementing it, not so much. So at what point do you decide this plan isn't working or this isn't being implemented properly? And what's the timeline on that?
Yeah.
Because we all know that the more behaviors go on, the harder it is to correct them.
It takes a longer time because there's a history now. Absolutely. So I'm going to kind of piggyback on things that both Christy and Zach really talked about. So in that instance, right, so if it's one of the like specialized programs like autism, MD, or LD, we are built into those classes. And so it's not just to come in when there's kind of problems that are happening. So by being present, we're hopefully already seeing, oh, there's something happening in this particular situation. Is it because November, we were only in school for X number of days, right? And so I'll just kind of go with that as an example, right? Like, now we're seeing something is happening with this particular student, so we're going to automatically start to begin to take what we say like informal data, but that could include the beginning of ABC data, because that's the information that for us, we look to see what's happening in that environment, that A, that B, and C, that Zach really discussed in detail. And then we're going to meet with the teacher and collaborate with the best practice strategies that we want to implement right away. We're going to do that ongoing observation to see how that student is responding to those strategies. And we're looking at those two pieces, right? So are the strategies being implemented consistently and with fidelity? And if so, is the behavior going in the direction we want to see, right? And that's where our data is telling us. It's not just because, oh, I think it's going in the direction I want it to see. It's based truly on like what we're really seeing through that, what we say, objective information. With a time frame, I think it's hard to say like it's got to be specific, because let's just say we're working with a classroom that has several different staff members, and there's maybe a new staff member that's to that classroom and they need more training. So I might say, you know what, these strategies are effective, but I'm noticing that when this particular student is with Christy, they're engaging in a little bit more frequency of that behavior. So then my job is to now work with Christy to help her feel more comfortable on that implementation of those strategies. I'm not going to change the plan or the strategies implemented because I see that it's been effective with Stacey and Zach. And so we're just kind of pinpointing those modifications. But let's say Stacey, Zach, and Christy are all implementing it with fidelity, the same that I would be, and I'm not seeing a reduction in the behavior through that data. That's when we say, hey guys, I think we need a more formalized behavior plan to really tease apart that behavioral function. And so that's when we request that FBA to be able to do not just ABC data, but sometimes we do more specific analysis of the behavior, more acronyms. But that just gives us more information to then propose a more individualized and intensive plan. So that's kind of how it begins and then how it might end. Or maybe it doesn't have to go that far because just those initial strategies we implemented were successful.
The severity of the behavior would change.
Right, and the severity of the behavior makes a difference as well. Let's just say, that particular student, all of a sudden we're seeing very severe behavior in November after this break. We may not just start with, we will put some strategies in place, but we may just go to the get-go of getting that FBA consent and then starting with the BIP because of intensity and duration of that behavior as well.
With the data, isn't that also sometimes, there's like a little bit of infidelity with the data depending on who's collecting it? So who collects the data
Right.
and who does that FBA? Is that always this team?
It depends. So it depends on the classroom and the staff, and because we are part of that classroom typically being assigned, we take on usually the responsibility of taking most of that data, especially if it's an FBA. So we're the ones who are taking the data to determine that function. If it's data to see like how frequent the behavior is, that can be as simple as a clicker data, right? Like, boom, that behavior happened or it didn't happen, right? So depending on the behavior, how often it's happening, how long it's happening, and the type of data that we're collecting, we'll determine like who would take the data, right? So if we have a classroom teacher, and I'll use the teacher here as an example, who is trained in behavior analysis, I will ask her, hey, can you take sample data using this method of data collection? Because I know that her and her class have been trained previously from using that system, but that doesn't mean that myself and the other BCBA who's in that classroom won't also take that data. But yes, we do want to make sure that there's accuracy to the data so we can make decisions based off of that.
And once you have a plan in place, how important is it also that that same plan is kind of crossing over to the home? And the reason I ask that is because I know it's important, and it doesn't always happen, and then you say the plan doesn't work, or it doesn't work because you're not implementing it appropriately at home, and that brings me to the home visits, and I'll leave this to the director's team, that not every parent is aware that they have home visits, and I will tell you that every home visit that I had to request. So I think that's a really big part, that we've got to get our child study teams to advise parents, you have this availability, and some may not want it, but some may say, hey, I'm struggling, help. And I'm not talking about COVID and we can go, but I mean just in general, if there's 6 visits, if there's 8, whatever it is per that IEP, I guess 6 is, is it 6
It's
with
6
teachers?
minimum.
It's a 6
and
minimum,
then
so
6
it's
for
more
teachers, 6 with the BC. But that's what I'm
Parents.
saying. I think that's not an option that's normally offered to parents.
Right.
And that could actually help in school, because I know very well, and you guys have all been to my home quite a number of times, that if it wasn't also being reinforced at home, at school, we would not have corrected the behavior.
It is. I mean, it's a partnership with everything, whether it's skill acquisition or the reduction of the behaviors. In particular, when we're looking at reduction of behavior, we as the behavior analysts also have to recognize that the plan might be needed to be modified, because I don't expect parents to implement the same type of intervention that we might be doing in the classroom setting. And so let's say we have a plan identified, we would look to pick what strategies are most relevant, and also being able to then during the home visit train that parent or parents on how does that look like in the home. If we're fortunate enough, sometimes in those home visits, we're able to also model that implementation of that strategy if the behavior occurs. So I think those kind of in vivo coaching supports is really also helpful to families. But I would never give a parent the same behavior plan as I would give the staff in the classroom, because I don't expect the same expectations of implementation. So we adapt it because it's only fair to look at the context of the setting. Usually there's other family members that are involved in a home setting, other children, right? So those are factors that we have to, ethically take a look at. So it's really looking to see what is most relevant and what can be the most successful to that home setting.
And can we see if we can kind of really give parents the knowledge that this is a tool
Yeah,
that's
I kind of wrote that down
available,
to
but I think it's
talk to
super
the teams a
important.
little bit, not only the self-contained, the classroom. Because we did discuss it was the 6, minimum, and
Right.
then it can extend, and it varies who actually is going into the home, as was kind of spoken about, depending on the need, and sometimes they go in together, and
Yes.
sometimes
Right.
it's the teacher. It really does vary on that need of the family or the child. So we're open to that,
Yep.
absolutely.
And can you speak a little bit about ignoring behaviors versus positive reinforcement versus negative consequences?
Sure. Right, so it does come down to kind of understanding the why that behavior is happening. And so Zach touched upon a little bit those functions that we might potentially be seeing. And so when that behavior occurs, we're gonna look back to that 3-term contingency, right? What is happening right after the behavior, that consequence, because that's gonna determine if that behavior will happen again, right? And so if I have, I'm gonna use a home setting example, right? So if my child is constantly getting up from the dining room table during meal times and then running around the house, and then I'm constantly now getting up and trying to get them to come back, I'm going to look to see kind of the pattern as to why is this happening? And it might be maybe I'm giving food that is non-preferred. Maybe my child is recognizing that they're getting a lot of nice attention from me because I have to stop what I'm doing to go attend to them, versus at a dining room table, maybe we're all kind of talking as a family, so they're not getting as much attention, right? So we'll use kind of attention as kind of the pseudo function for this example, right? And so you're going to be looking at understanding that why to then determine what we're going to do in response to it. And so we wouldn't want to be giving attention for that maladaptive behavior if that's what they're looking for. So I would want to be flipping it and give attention every time my child is sitting at the table doing what we say that contextually appropriate behavior. So the attention is contingent now on the behavior I want to see more of, and not going to be delivered on that interfering behavior. So the strategy might be every time they start running around, we're going to do, let's say, planned ignoring. We're not going to respond and get up and chase Bree because she's looking for that attention at that time. But when she gets back, I'm going to give the attention at that point. Does that make sense? How we're going to be using attention contingent on the why? Because if we were to deliver it on the inappropriate behaviors consistently, we're going to keep that behavior happening at a high rate.
And can you explain exactly what ignoring is?
So,
Because, Mayor, if you think back a few years,
yeah.
it's not ignoring.
Right. So when we talk about planned ignoring, we say first and foremost we are ignoring the behavior and we're not ignoring the child, right? So if at that same time, if my daughter now is not just running around but trying to climb on top of furniture and dive off of it, I'm not going to ignore that behavior because that's a safety concern. I might go over and bring her down without saying anything, right? And so my attention is going to be minimal to ensure safety. So size, nonverbal communication, all of those things could be a form of attention, so you'd want to make sure that we remain, what we say, neutral, right? So we're not going to be mad about the behavior, because sometimes that's a response that the student is looking for. We're going to remain calm, neutral, but only attend to the behavior we want to see. So kind of doing one of these is not ignoring the behavior. Does that make sense?
Say that because I had, this happened in the home, I was given data sheets to collect my data, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm not really ignoring. Like, I'm giving the side eye, I'm moving myself, that's not really ignoring.
Right.
So I think that's also important.
I think proximity, that's a great example, right? Like getting closer to where the child is, like that's not ignoring, that's me coming closer, you're seeing that response, and that does sometimes maybe reinforce it because I'm still giving some kind of attention. Exactly.
And can you explain for skill acquisition, when we teach something in chaining, whether it's backwards chaining or forwards chaining, and why do you think that's better than just teaching a full skill?
So I wouldn't say that it's better, because we do use all three, right? So, and that's, you're very up to your terminology. So I'll kind of explain it for our parents who are online, right? So forward chaining, backward chaining, and then what we call a total task, which is what, when you're teaching the entire sequence of the skill. So depending on, we usually look to see, does the child have any components of that skill? So we'll use, like, Stacey, what was one of the skills you had? Was it laundry? Laundry. So we'll use laundry as an example, right? So when we're talking about a task analysis, which Stacey talked about, is basically just the steps that need to be taken place in order to get that skill done. And every life skill typically has multi-steps, right? So when you're putting together a sandwich, when you're putting laundry together, when you're taking a shower, there's multiple steps. It's not just like a single step that kind of does all of it for you. So we would look to see, does the child have any components of that task analysis? And then that might help us to decide which type of chaining we might teach, right? And so as an example, I might do like a total task if they have, I'll just use an example, if it's a chain of 7 steps, but they have 3 out of the 7 already, I might teach it total task because there's only 4 steps that they really need to learn. If they have maybe none of the steps in their repertoire, depending on the skill, I may most likely teach the last step first. So I would teach kind of the sequence of putting the laundry together. So turning the first knob, opening the lid, getting the, we'll use pods because pods are so much easier than kind of pouring the detergent. Getting a pod, putting it in, putting the clothes in, and then my target would be closing the lid of the washer. And the reason why I might do it that way is because my reinforcement will come closer to the skill that my focus is on, because as soon as you close the washer lid, I'm going to say, hey, that was awesome. I love how you did that. And then we work backwards. So then the second to the last step would be then my next focus. And then you kind of work your way up the to-do list till you get to targeting that first step last.
My final question for now is, transportation seems to be a big area of contention with behaviors, right? And I often see and I often hear about things going on the buses, or when the buses arrive, or when the buses, and there's incident on the buses that I understand are reported. Does that get to your office so that then, or does that just say in transportation, so that then they can go and intervene before we have major issues? Because
it does get to the school, and it also gets to myself, and they are notified also. You may already have information on it from the principal or the student because you're at the school and you see it happen.
Yeah, the case managers will usually inform us as well because they'll get copies of any kind of written incident reports. And so then what we typically do is then we request the videos because, as you can tell, like our science is based on observing what's happening, right, and what's happening before and after. And so we observe and watch those videos that are on the bus to be able to see what is happening. And we've done ABC data off of those videos themselves, and then we've identified strategies. And then typically what we do is we reach out to the driver and the aide on that bus, and then we request to meet with them. We've ridden buses, but in addition to being on the bus, we need time to be able to talk to these staff members because on the bus, it's kind of like a hit and run, right? Like they're paying attention to driving, they're paying attention to the other students. And so we then reach out and send them emails requesting to be able to sit with them, to go through what are the strategies that we're going to be doing. We can role play with you. We can answer your questions at that time. And so it might be, I'll just use the middle school because we're working on something for the middle school. They may not be able to meet with us after they drop the student off in the morning because let's say they have a second run, and that second run is to Brookside. But we'll meet you at Brookside when you're done, and you'll come into the building, and we'll sit with you, and we'll go through the plan then, and we'll talk to you about it, and then I'll ride the bus so you can see how it's done. And then we will maybe do some follow-up where prior to the student getting on the bus at the end of the day, I'll go out because the bus might already be parked there, and I'll say, how are things going? What are your questions? You know, do you need to have me come on the bus again? So there's kind of like, it's a revolving kind of plan based off of what's happening. Just like I talked about the strategies I give to a parent, I'm also going to be realistic in the strategies that I give to that aide because they're on a bus, there's other students, and we also have to kind of think about just the logistics of that environment. So we usually are looking more in those instances to always typically use some kind of visuals for the student to understand our expectation, and then the aide to be able to kind of reinforce those appropriate behaviors so we're not drawing attention to those interfering behaviors. But additional strategies are like, what can we do to keep that student engaged in a more appropriate way? And so looking to see what we can do to keep them, you know, kind of engaged. So we've talked about maybe like listening to music, whether it's on the bus or, you know, individual audio, attaching things to backpacks where they could have fidgets, not something that can be tossed easily, but keeping them engaged so that there's a more appropriate behavior that's happening as they move from point A to point B.
A lot of times, some of the strategies that we're using in the buildings, you can't use on a bus because ultimately they have to keep those kids safe.
Exactly.
Right? It's a moving vehicle. And if it's on a larger bus, then you don't have a para. So it's that driver that is now responsible for 54, I think it is, students that can't really be watching them because she's watching the road. So when we're trying not to say, don't do that or no, and it's happening on the bus, doesn't that become challenging for us? And do we have bus para or bus driver specific trainings? Because I know that the video that, I believe Marietta, you were here, we had, before COVID, where we had transportation and the business office here, and the video that they're watching is, I mean, it's a very generic video that I don't know if it works for a lot of our learners. So is there something specific?
I mean, I know that they're also given access to the proactive strategies that we have for all of the staff, and the drivers and aides are given that as well. And those can be general in the sense that, like, yes, we may need to look specifically at, you know, Joey and what's happening on the bus, because we might need to take one of those general strategies and modify it to this particular situation. But it does talk a lot about ways to be proactive, because that's what we want to do. We don't want to have to wait till the behavior happens to then be responding at that point.
And then do you work with the TAPS program as well? Or is it only K through 12?
Nope, we are with the TAPS program as well, with both teachers that are currently in the TAPS program. Yeah. You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay.
That was great.
Do they ask questions from?
Are there any questions? No?
Okay.
No.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.